A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. Assalamu alaikum and good evening. Welcome to On the Couch with me, Farida Rabia and Soki Nzinzi. On the Couch aims to unpack, deal and confront those issues we often don't want to address, but issues that affect you or those close to you. This is where you hear the difference on 100.4 FM. Now, On the Couch together with the Lately in Land and Housing is your weekly show that discusses current affairs in political landscape pertaining to housing, evictions, equitable access to land, and tenure security. Today, we will be exploring the law through intersectional lenses. Amidst the Women's Month and the struggle that continues against the persistent patriarchal laws, as we recall the President's homage to the 1956 Women's March, we question what's worth celebrating today. Now, even as we tread forward, organizations like Women's Legal Center are engaged in unyielding battles for women's rights and to unravel the legal landscape through the lens of intersectionality. We are honored to be joined by attorneys Chrissy Blouse and Kensani Motaleni, representing the Women's Legal Center. Good evening, Chrissy. Kensani, welcome to On the Couch.
Good evening. Thank you.
Listeners, our lines are open for your messages, concerns and questions. 0786 10 11 12. Before we dive into these topics, I think it's important for us to sort of clarify what intersectionality means. It's an idea that that various aspects of a person's identity, such as race, gender and class, intersect to create unique experiences and challenges. And so we are going to examine how this concept interacts with our legal systems. Now, Kensani, if we can start with you by delving into why examining the law through intersectional lenses is important. As we just defined intersectionality, how does considering these various identities change our understanding of legal issues?
Thank you for having me. So I think the most important thing is that the reason why our work is done through an intersectional lens or in an intersectional manner, it is because it recognizes that women are not a homogeneous group and thus experience discrimination differently. And also intersectionality is not only essential to understand systemic injustice, but also effective strategies for change, right? So if you apply an intersectional approach to the problem that you might have at hand, for example, we say land, for example, or allocation of houses, you can't just take it as a housing issue, but it has other factors that are contributing. You need to consider healthcare services, access to roads, access to schools, all those things. So that's why when we look at an issue at the Women's Legal Center, we try and look through it in different lenses and see where you can actually have a higher reach and a bigger impact, as opposed to just addressing one issue and later another issue.
I'm just thinking, as you speak in, often when we are speaking about one topic, there's always many other factors that contribute to that topic. So if you were to speak about land, you don't just look at that one aspect. If you are to speak about women, you don't just look at women. You sort of have to break it down.
Exactly.
And I think that might make it difficult for you guys actually to really, provide and offer this, freedom of being and freedom of access to things that are just basic human rights.
It's not really that hard.
Okay.
I just think the only challenge we have is trying to apply it to how people actually see it, right? Because people want to deal with housing as housing. They really are not concerned with anything else that comes with housing. But for us, it's very important to ensure that people understand why it is important to look through everything through an intersectional lens. Because if you do that, you ensure that you don't isolate any issues, you take care of all the blind spots that are available, and you ensure that women don't come back each and every time to get basic things, right? If you can allocate a house to me at a place where there's access to a road, if my husband or my partner is abusing me, I can call the police. The police will be able to have access to me. If I need to access healthcare services or contraceptives, for example, I can walk to the clinic and that will be available to me. My children would be able to go to a school in a nearby area where they don't have to travel miles and miles away. If I need to access work and economic opportunities, I will have a bus that can transfer transport me on the road, or I can actually work in my actual community. So it's very hard for people to understand why we take the approach that we take, but it's very essential for us to take this approach because it actually lessens the burden on women to continuously prove that, no, I have more than one issue.
Yeah, more than one issue. I think I've been faced with it. I keep saying this whole week I got this rude awakening because I'm like, oh my gosh, all these challenges that women are going through, and it almost sounds like women are complaining because women are saying it all the time, and because no one is sort of dealing with this, whatever it is that we're saying, it sort of sounds like complaints. And for me, it's like, you just don't understand. It's tough out here being a woman. Like, and wherever you find yourself as a single woman, as a mother, wherever it is, it's like, it's hard. It's hard.
It's a lot.
It is a lot. So now, this is a powerful tool for understanding like the nuances of law. Now let's sort of transition into discussing how patriarchal systems can impact legal outcomes, and then can you sort of just elaborate on these systems and how they tend to be lenient towards men?
So I think that maybe to approach this question we should topple it on its head, because, and maybe use the starting point as our constitution. When Kensani outlined an intersectional approach in talking about education, access to sanitation, access to health, access to policing services, those are all actually rights that are already contained within our constitution, and those rights are already applicable to everyone. And so the question isn't about necessarily how the law kind of suits men better. It's about how women continue to be discriminated through laws, even though they exist and the rights are there and they're applicable to both men and women. But when we look at the law absent of the intersectional lens, what we find is law that still kind of highlights patriarchal norms and values in our society. And we must also understand that even though there's the law, we have the bodies or institutions which are responsible for implementing the laws and implementing them adequately. And what happens is, if you have important stakeholders or organizations or bodies which do not implement the law through this intersectional lens, you find a society where we really only have formal equality, what we call. It's a sort of equality that's on paper. But the lived reality for women specifically is very different, because like you've said, women come then with so many issues. If on a daily basis they have so many issues. And then we try to kind of think about, but why is that we have this, what many call a beautiful constitution with beautiful rights in it, and these rights really should apply to everyone. But when you look at the rights in isolation, and we'd maybe just speak about housing without speaking about all of the other intersecting rights and intersecting issues that come with the right to housing, we live in a system and a society where the law then behaves in a patriarchal manner because it is absent of the gendered lens that is needed to give effect to true substantive equality to women. And what we then advocate and litigate for is this issue of substantive equality throughout our court systems and throughout various institutions which we work with and interact with. Because when you have substantive equality, it removes that patriarchal norms, values that are placed on women within, whether it's violence, within whether it's the workplace, within housing and housing policies and systems and laws. And what you have is a lived reality context that's reflected in our law. And I think that's the thing that is missing, and why then we'll say that women are the face of kind of discrimination, even still through our legal systems, our laws and our policies, is because the laws and the way it is implemented does not reflect the lived reality needs, as Kensani so nicely set out for us. And then what we sit with is that lack of substantive equality to give effect to true protection.
And I think the point that you made on lived reality is so important, because it's almost a contradiction. You have a good constitution, but it doesn't speak to your needs, and you sort of like, but the constitution says, and then we sound redundant because it's like, yes, but this is how I live. I'm not having access to basic things, and you are sort of just overlooking it because you don't understand. So when you speak about understanding, how do you get it right from just like your grassroots levels to really constitutional level? Where are we at with getting it in our minds? We need to understand.
I think it's really that simple. You just, like Chrissy said, you really just have to take the lived realities and like mirror it through the laws that currently exist, right? And then where you see a gap or a defect, then you take it up and then you see if that defect or gap can be remedied through the courts and through legislation. That is very important. But I think the other big problem is that often as the Women's Legal Center, we've had amazing judgments that have changed the laws, but the implementation is the biggest hurdle because government departments do not fear being in contempt of court. And that is very, very problematic for us because in as much as there's a victory, but is it really a victory? Because these women that we advocate for, these women that we represent and whose rights we are trying to advance still get like a slap in their faces, right? They still get experience discrimination even more. So I think I would say that the problem is not with actually getting things right, but the problem is with actually the implementation of court orders and proper implementation of laws, right? The law says you should not discriminate. The law says everybody has a right to equality. Then why do you want to exclude people? Why do you feel that someone else does not deserve the respect that they should? Human dignity is an inherent right? So why do you decide that Chrissy deserves respect and another person does not deserve respect? And that's where the problem is. And like Chrissy alluded to earlier, it goes back to cultural practices, religious practices, and how society is in general based on the foundation of patriarchal laws and norms and standards. So so then everything then becomes very hard to implement in our society as it already stands.
And maybe just to say, like, a big part of this that, when we're speaking to you, it sounds like, okay, surely, like, we should get this. Why are we? I mean, your question was, why are we then still so far, right?
Yeah.
We must also understand that this is not by coincidence, right? We are very specifically talking about rights that's missing to a very specific group. It is literally still because of the way women and the way in which women's bodies are viewed by society, and which there is the patriarchal and moralistic views, notions and patterns, like Insani said, through religious beliefs, cultural beliefs, and other institutions that have viewed women a specific way, and then we viewed women as a specific way, but then we view women of a particular color a different way, and then we view women of a particular race and socioeconomic background a different way. And then, so when Kinsani says, so why is it that one person is deserving of these rights or inherent protections and another group not? It's really because historically our society placed certain respect and rights and kind of geared towards certain races and certain genders, and now we're almost working backwards, still 23 years after our constitution, to still afford protection to a predominant group in our society who is vulnerable because society had deemed it to be vulnerable at the outset. It's not by accident. We actually here by design.
0786 10 11 12 for all your questions and comments. I was just thinking from understanding to application, and that's really important, because I suppose we all understand. We really know what the Constitution says. So it's more like applying it and making sure that everybody is living a life of dignity, irrespective of what background, race, and all of the things that make us different, but really the respect and the dignity that we need to live in. I'm wondering, so the women that come to you guys and seeking, support in these situations, could you give us like an example of something or where a woman came to you and it was something that you guys could deal with and had to go to the courts, and then it just didn't, we're still waiting, there's still a process in play?
So I think the recent example that I can make is with the W versus H case, where a woman was in a life partnership for about 12 years, and she decided that she wanted to leave the relationship, and she actually wanted maintenance because at the beginning of the relationship her partner had asked her to stop working, and she gave birth, and the partner asked her to actually be a homemaker, and he was afforded the time to go and work and make more money and advance himself. And so at the end, the woman wanted the courts to actually extend common law maintenance to people in life partnerships, right? For him to continue maintaining her post the relationship, so that she doesn't leave the relationship with nothing, because she gave everything in that relationship, right? And it also goes to the work that Chrissy does, which we call unpaid care work, where you recognize that women actually do this work, but they don't get paid for it because it's work at some point, right? You raising kids, you attending to household stuff. So, but anyway, so in this instance, the court found that the client actually had not made a case for that, and that the client was in a more privileged position because her father could assist her, right? So it was very disappointing for us to get that kind of judgment where the court rejected to actually develop common law further, and unfortunately they then made a direct access application to the Constitutional Court. We actually got feedback last week that the direct access has been refused, and the merits actually were not even dealt with, right? So now you're sitting with a woman that is bleeding money, who actually had to take out loans to fund this litigation, and sign surety agreements with friends and friends and family. But now you're getting a court that's saying, actually, we're not going to deal with this matter now. Maybe like try other avenues. But what are the other avenues? Like women and men and or partners in general should be able to enter relationships and leave relationships and have those rights recognized, right? Everything has to have a legal consequence, and that is what we're advancing for. Not everybody wants to get married. So then what happens to people that who do not want to get married but want to live together, want to consolidate everything and put their hard-earned money into the family? So are you saying that these people must just leave with nothing? So it's quite difficult, but we keep trying, we keep pushing forward, and hopefully one day, something will come up.
0786 10 11 12 is the number that you can send your questions, comments, and concerns to. We are just going for a short breather. This is on the couch on 100.4 FM. Radio 786, where you hear the difference. It is on the couch, and we are speaking to attorneys Chrissy Blouse and Kensani Motaleni, attorneys at the Women's Legal Center, and we are speaking about exploring the law through an intersectional lens. Before the break, Kensani was giving us an example of a case where the law didn't jump to the woman's favor, and off air we were trying to break it down. I was still trying to understand, but moving along swiftly, I guess. So the Western Cape Equality High Court declared the City of Cape Town's housing policy to be inconsistent with the Constitution. Kensani, can you tell us more about the Abdullah Court order?
Yeah, so Abdullah versus the City of Cape Town was finalized this year. So the case was about the housing schemes constructed by the Housing Authority, which I will just, for easy purposes, I'll refer to it as the policy, right? So this policy ran from 1980 to 31 March 1999, and the policy was implemented at a local level where people were able to get subsidized houses. This obviously happened before the enactment of the Constitution. So now the defects with the sale agreement and the policy itself was that the policy did not recognize women as breadwinners, right? So the application said you had to be a breadwinner, and a breadwinner in the 1980s was that it had to be a man, right? But this man had to be married for them to be eligible for this application. But the women's details were never recorded anyway. So we have an instance now where the city of Cape Town is unable to locate these women because their details were never ever recorded. And women were not even able to sign the agreement with the city when the units became available for allocation as well. And the policy did not reflect women also as co-purchasers in equal share. So it only reflected the man's details. And the biggest issue with this is that it obviously discriminated against women, right? And it put them in a very vulnerable position, because then what happens if your partner evicts you? And if you look at housing policies in South Africa, if at some point you were eligible for a house, you are not allowed to apply for a further house. So if I've gotten a house through my partner Chrissy, I can't apply and actually get allocated another house in my when I'm no longer in a relationship with Chrissy. So this meant that women, black women, were more vulnerable and were at liberty to be evicted at any time their husbands decided that they didn't want them anymore. So now what's going to happen now is that if you live in one of these areas that I'm going to mention now, like Pero, Athlone, Bonteheuwel, Bishop Lavis, Belha, and Ravensmead, for example, we have a longer list on our social media pages, and your partner at the time was a beneficiary or was the breadwinner, and you remember them signing this contract, you can go to the housing office and let them capture your details, because the court order then says that the city is not allowed to transfer the house once it's fully paid up into the male's details only. They now, because of this court order, have to capture the women's details and then transfer the house on both their names in equal shares as equal beneficiaries.
So just so I can understand, I'm married to this person. He decides he does not want to be married to me. And he's not able to chase me out of the house because both our names are on this document.
Yes.
Okay, and so that's enough protection for the woman?
For now. But previously, I mean, I can imagine before the Abdullah case, how many women were evicted out of their homes, right? Who were just told to pack up and go. And I mean, we do also have some women whose husbands left them in that house, and they had to take the burden and the responsibility to paying off these loans with the city, entering into acknowledgements of debt and taking everything over, but only for at the end for the man to come back and say, actually, oh, by the way, I have a house that's fully paid up, transfer it to me. But then that's unjustified enrichment, because you did not even honor the contract, someone else did. So that's why it's very important for women to stand up if they were part of this housing scheme, to go and get their details captured, because the city actually admitted that there's about 12,000 to 52,000 beneficiaries that they are unaware of. So we need to all work together and ensure that everybody's details are captured as soon as possible.
Beneficiaries mean women now.
Yeah. So I'm meaning women, not actually beneficiaries, but co-purchasers and who would be then co-owners once the houses get transferred. Yeah.
There is a number of shelters specifically designed for women and their various circumstances. Do you feel that this might be a contributing factor? Especially if we're looking at the times that we are moving in from where we were and how we are now. Because I'm thinking, if you've been kicked out of your place, where are you going to go to? Are you going to go to the street if you have because family is like a luxury these days. You might go to your family, or you end up at the shelter and sort of pick yourself up. Is that...
It's very tricky, because the people that are mainly affected by this are black women. And when I say black, I mean like coloreds, Indians, and everybody, right? And if you look at how we see the family structures, that if Chrissy is thrown out of her house, she can come live with me as her sister, right? We always take on one another. So I wouldn't say that shelters have increased numbers because of these women that were necessarily evicted from their homes, because like, I mean, like Black women are amazing. We always make a plan, right? And also with shelters, you are sometimes given 3 months to get yourself back up. But with the unemployment rates, where are you going to get this job? And as much as you're going to try your best to upskill and try your best, but what are the odds that you will actually be fine or will actually have shelter after that time, right? So it's quite a tricky one, but I don't think there's a real direct link between these women that are being evicted and the increased numbers in shelters.
Is this court order, this Abdullah case, supposed to be groundbreaking? Is it supposed to make women feel like, okay, I have a sense of more power or more ownership, especially when we speak about land and belonging and spaces?
I mean, it's supposed to be. I know Radio 786 is one of the partners that the city has listed in the court order to disperse this information and trying to get them to come as often as possible, even local newspapers as well. But also we know that not everybody can read. And I think also the biggest thing is just access to information, right? If you have access to information in a language that you understand, you are able to get up and go and try and do something. But with how we've seen everything happen, this is going to take a bit of more time, right? Because some people don't even know that the houses that they currently live in were gotten through the specific housing scheme or the specific policy. So yeah, it's going to require a lot of effort, because considering that it's from the 1980s, so you're talking about people that are way older, and might not actually have access to this information. But the city was actually asked to put a note about this judgment, about this court order, and actually put a call out on their billing every month. So we can only hope that there is progress. We have not asked for the stats to date since Feb 2023 of how women have come forward, but we can only hope that there's progress, because we, as the Women's Legal Center, we have not had any cases where women approached us and said that they are not getting assisted by the city of Cape Town. So we are just hoping that the implementation of the court order is being effective where it needs to be implemented.
You know, when I listen to attorneys and I read some of these things, I'm like, okay, it should be there. We don't have to have this conversation because, you know, processing is very difficult for me at this moment. But could you provide us with an example of how intersectionality has influenced a legal case or policy from the Women's Legal Center? There is this campaign that you ran advocating for amendments to the COIDA.
Yeah, so maybe what I can do is speak to one of the cases we've worked on over the past few years, and its judgment that came out, and then amendments that were made to COIDA. But maybe just to say how this case illustrates this intersectional lens, and maybe just to explain that typically when people think about litigation and lawyers and cases, you think about an applicant and a respondent, or an applicant and a defendant, or a complainant and a defendant. You know, those are typically the terms, and you think of two parties that litigate against each other for specific relief. The Women's Legal Center is a human rights organization where we conduct strategic and public interest litigation. And what that means is that we conduct litigation hoping to set a precedent that will affect a group of women, or an issue that will affect all women in South Africa, right? And some of the ways in which we do that as well are through amicus interventions. And what an amicus intervention is, where there are two parties that are fighting about a specific issue, or litigating rather about a specific issue. We come in as an independent party, given the expertise within our organization of the work that we do, given this expertise around intersectional lens in litigation. And we come before a court as an amicus, which is a friend of the court, to say to the court, you're litigating right now about housing. You're litigating right now about COIDA, which is the Compensation for Occupational Injuries and Diseases Act. But what we want to do is come before you as an independent party to bring this intersectional lens before you. Because if you're going to hear this matter without the intersectional lens, we're going to come to a judgment that doesn't reflect the lived reality of women. And that's exactly what we did in the case of Mahlangu versus the Department of Labor, in which there was a domestic worker who fell while on duty at her workplace, and she died. She fell into the pool. She could not swim, and she died in the course and scope of her workplace. Her dependents, so her major daughter, went to the compensation fund to claim compensation for her as a dependent that was left behind, which the Act makes provision for. Only to find that when seeking this compensation, she was told by the fund that you do not qualify because domestic workers is specifically excluded from the Compensation Act. So earlier...
Is there a reason for that?
This is what I was just about to say. Earlier, your question was, how and why and what are these patriarchal ways that come, or norms that reflect in the law? This is a direct example of how patriarchal norms and values are still reflected in the law, because there is no rational link for a domestic worker who works in a private home not to be covered by a law that was designed by our government to give effect to constitutional rights, to give effect to social security rights, and to give effect to protection of workers in the workplace. Because COIDA protects all workers within the workplace for injuries or diseases or death in the course and scope or arising out of the course or scope of your employment. Yet, among other categories such as self-employed or contractors, for example, who don't have that employment relationship, domestic workers who work in private homes are specifically excluded. Why is that? Because statistics have shown us that domestic workers who work in private homes, majority is women, and majority of those domestic workers are black women. So there is a clear example of how there's a law that's designed to give effect to rights, yet that law views a specific group of women because of their race and their gender and their socioeconomic background as less deeming of rights. And what we did was intervene in that matter to say to the court that this exclusion of domestic workers who work in private homes, it's unjustifiable in terms of our constitution. It's unconstitutional, it's invalid. And we came before them as an independent party to say, if you do not use an intersectional lens when looking at this issue of this exclusion, we're going to miss critical parts. And now let me maybe break down into examples for you as to why the lens is important. In COIDA at the moment, so in the Act, and in the Act used to say that your dependents are able to claim. So if you die in the course and scope of your employment, your children are able to, or your dependents are able to come and claim the compensation that you would have been bringing home due to the employment relationship. However, there was a cap on it, so that there was 2 restrictions on it, and there is still in the amendments. It is that the restriction is that your dependent is up until 24 years old and that they are still in tertiary education. Why is an intersectional lens important? Because we know that black women who conduct domestic work are in the category of employment where they earn minimum or less than minimum wage. They do not have the means and the income. They come from previously disadvantaged backgrounds where most of the children do not attend tertiary education. Where sometimes when we, and this is what the arguments we put before the court is that we need to look at the context. In an African context, and this is why, as an African feminist organization, it's important to put an African context before the law, because we know that you can have your niece come and stay with you oftentimes. If your niece or your nephew or your uncle or your brother, your dependent is not always your biological child. In an African system, through different cultures and religions, our dependents look very different. Your grandmother could be a dependent of you. And so this notion of dependency really didn't reflect the lived reality of domestic workers. And so once again, if you now say that domestic workers are included into COIDA, but yet the provisions still now are 24 and or at tertiary education, the law is there and it says quote now that domestic workers are protected, but the lived reality of domestic workers and the dependents still won't change because the law still doesn't reflect that lived reality context. And so this is an important case. It was a case that went all the way up to the Constitutional Court, and it was one of the first instances where our Constitutional Court directly said that intersectionality must be used in litigation, because what intersectionality allows is that it allows you to then view a certain group of people that were previously rendered invisible. They were previously rendered as underpaid, undervalued, and it allows you to put the lived reality issues of that previously invisible group now at the forefront of the law and the needs. And that's a powerful judgment. And now we have amendments to COIDA. Domestic workers are now included. The amendments go further now, for example, to speak about transportation. Why is transportation and land and housing important?
Yeah.
Because we know, for example, for people who live and work on farms, they are often transported by the employer. In the Western Cape, a few years ago, and quite often every year, we have incidences of workers being transported on open flatbed trucks from farm to farm. If that truck gets into an accident, those workers die on the spot because they are using transport that is not fit for the purpose. And so now COIDA makes provision for such instances, for example. And another thing to go back to what Kensani mentioned at the outset of intersectionality, looking at different issues, is that even domestic workers live in specific areas, have to travel from specific areas back to their places of employment. And so this is a big case in which the court actively acknowledged an intersectional lens and placed it at the forefront of litigation.
Honestly, context is important. Technician is telling me we have 4 minutes left, but really context is important, because you have to look at everything that contributes to this human being's life. And I'm just thinking, if domestic workers were never a part of this conversation or part of the Constitution, that means those who have died many years ago, we will never know. And it would almost be like it's a normal thing that they died. Or, who's to say they weren't murdered? Just saying, for example. So then what happens then when we speak about dependents and the family that you're looking after, the sacrifices that you're making sort of to provide this good life? So I'm leaving home to go to another community where the wealth is a lot, you know, accessible to me, in hopes that you have better options for you. And even when we speak about better options, and I'm thinking of tertiary education, I'm thinking, okay, you say in 24 and in university, we're barely making it to high school. Our primary school children aren't even really staying in primary school anymore. So that's, you have to have a big view on this. There is a comment here. This person is saying, a colleague of mine, his wife of 30 years passed on. His house is registered in his and his wife's name. They have children to whom the house must go to. My colleague remarried, and his new wife moves in to his and his children's home. He started drinking heavily because his new wife becomes a problem, and she gets a protection order and puts him and his children out of their home. I don't know if there's something that you guys deal with specifically. I want to believe that the Constitution will obviously also address this kind of matter. What can this person do?
I think there's multiple layers to the complaint, because you see, once again, intersectionality, because it's really starting out as a complaint of a housing issue, and the man and his children has been put out of their house, but at the same time she's saying there was domestic violence in the house, and the woman got a protection order to protect her from the domestic violence. If the house obviously is registered in the man's name and he's entitled to the house, then he would have recourse to kind of get the house back into his possession. But I feel like there are 2 to 3 different issues that would be relevant here, and really would need kind of a proper consultation to flesh out all of the kind of appropriate remedies and recourse for the instance.
Okay, so quickly, because we have to wrap up. So can you guys just recommend some resources for our listeners to learn more about intersectionality, what that might mean for their particular circumstances, gender studies, the impact of patriarchy? And I think patriarchy is such a big word, and it's so taboo that
Yes.
you really don't understand, even if you might experience the power of patriarchy as such. I think especially for the women on the Cape Flats and in the township, that these kinds of language and terms, it passes their ears. So at least some resources that they can read upon, numbers that they can call.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think we should direct everyone to our website. So our organization is called the Women's Legal Center, and so it would be www.wlce.co.za. So it's www.wlce.co.za. We also have a legal advice unit where when women have any issues, they are able to come through to our office and speak to a paralegal and do an initial consultation around any legal issues they may have. And that is pro bono, because we provide pro bono legal services to women who may need it. So women are free to come to our offices as well in relation to any of the issues that Kensani and I were speaking about. And our offices are at 5 St. George's Mall. On the second floor is the Women's Legal Center. And then please do look at our website. And then also we have social media. We're on social media as well. So particularly our Instagram page is WLCE Cape Town, WLCE_Cape Town, where a lot of this information around the litigation that we do around litigation through an intersectional lens and cases are posted on there. And all of the COIDA amendments that we spoke about as well.
Well, Chrissy Blouse, Kensani Motaleni, attorneys from the Women's Legal Center, thank you so much for speaking to us this evening. Until we chat again, I do think that you guys need to take it to communities and bring women out for better understanding and sort of in simpler language so that everybody can grasp the information that you're sharing. Well, that's all we have for you. Up next is Reflections with Ayub Ali. You can expect community finances and then the conversation around inheritance. I'm Farida Rabia and Soki and Zinzi. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.